welcome to the first video of 2025. Hi, I'm Lily. I'm lilykate makes on Instagram, Ravelry, all those places, and I'm a knitwear designer based in northwest England. So along with everyone else on Nettie, Instagram and YouTube, of course, I have to do a roundup of everything I made in 2024. And it's only when I've actually pulled everything out and laid it all out on the bed here that I'm like, oh, actually there's quite a bit there, so this might be a bit of a long video. I shall preface it by saying that the majority of these items I have knit 100% myself. However, as this is my full-time job, I do A, have quite a bit of time for that, and B, sometimes work with other people or sample knitters, and I kind of ummed and ahed over whether I should include those items in this because I haven't knit it all myself, and obviously the title is what I made in 2024, but we know that's just kind of a catch-all term. So some of these items were either sample knit by a friend, or I kind of share the project with my mum. Maybe she knit the body, I knit the sleeves, something like that. So I'll always say as I get to them whether it was knit by me or a joint project. But yeah, I just thought I'd just clarify that before beginning. And I'm also going to apologise in advance for the creaky floorboards in here. If you can hear those, sorry. Kind of no avoiding it. Even if I'm sat on a chair, I'll probably still be squeaking. So hopefully that isn't too annoying. Have a nice, bright, beautiful, wintry, crisp day in here today. So I thought I'd make the most of having some nice light and film in the bedroom here. Hopefully the light stays consistently nice for however long it takes me to get through this massive pile, but it's just filling a king-size bed basically. Or maybe I'll split it into a part two because brevity is not my strong suit, so I'll try not to waffle too much basically. I'll kind of go in semi-chronological order, but with the exception of what I'm wearing, which was actually one of the projects I finished later in the year, but I'm wearing it now, so we'll start with that. This is the checker plate sweater, which is kind of different for my usual style. This one was 100% knit by me in a yarn called Delana La Madrelana DK that I bought at Barcelona Knits Festival last year, and I just thought it would work really well as a textured sweater. Which is, yeah, a bit different for me. I don't tend to do too much texture, but it is something that I'm kind of enjoying a bit more at the moment. So yeah, the pattern for this one isn't actually available yet, but it will be in mid-January. I think I'm going to go for about the 16th. I think that's kind of what I've agreed with test knitters and everything. So yeah, pattern coming soon. Calling this stitch pattern checker plate stitch. It was inspired by my friend Naomi and her accidentally printed sweater that when she left a cardigan to block drying on the back of a metal truck, and it came out with this sort of print, and I was like, gonna do that, but deliberately. So yeah, you wouldn't necessarily think that the bed of a truck or like metal sheeting would provide inspiration for knitwear, but there you go. And apparently checker plate is the term for it, so it had to be the checker plate sweater, didn't it? Pattern coming soon. And this is probably one of my favourite makes, actually. I've worn it lots. It's super comfy and cosy, but also quite hard wearing because it's quite a rustic yarn. You know, it's not the softest, but I find it doesn't bother me at all, and it's super warm. And I wore this one to go on a hike, for example, which I would never normally do in most of my knitwear. So I have faith in its durability like that it won't go pilly or bubbly or anything. Yeah, split hem detail. Don't know if you can see that there. All over texture that's lined up nicely with the raglans. I do say so myself. And that's all in the pattern for all the different sizes, of course. And yeah, pattern coming soon in January. I've also just realised that this lighting in here is perfect for demonstrating the texture and the difference that your angle makes when taking either photos or videos of it. If I stand straight onto the window here, this part looks like completely flat. So if I took a selfie here, it looks like completely flat and boring. Turn side on and look at it pop. Really makes a difference. From now on, I will try to go in somewhat chronological order. So this was the first item that I actually finished in 2024. However, it was cast on in 2023, but we're going with finished months here. So first up is the Calm Down sweater, which was the second in my now series of Calm Down patterns. The Calm Down cardigan was the previous year. I knit that in grey originally, and then I thought that the fit and The shoulder shaping would work really well on a sweater, but with a different V-neck. So the cardigan has quite a low V, but then I completely changed, completely changed the neck shaping to be a higher and kind of different sloped V for the sweater. And added a double knit edging, which is my favourite detail of the cardigan, but it's quite a bit narrower on the V-neck here and has this little overlap, or faux overlap, I should say, detail at the bottom of the V. I knit this in Durarum Natura Ulysses. Can't remember the shade name off the top of my head. But this kind of navy with, it kind of looks like it's a thread of black through it, so it's a really deep, rich navy. Really enjoyed knitting with this. Again, that kind of slightly rustic feeling yarn, but in a non-rustic colour. And my one comment on this yarn would be that it is like Velcro. I mean, that's what you get, isn't it, with the rustic ones, but it does stick. Just pick up a bit of everything, so hence why I'm just stood here pulling bits of fluff, pulling my grey hairs off here. That's humbling. We'll forget about those, but yeah, I do really enjoy wearing it, and again, it's lovely and hard wearing to wear. That sounds strange, doesn't it? But hopefully you know what I mean. And is a very casual, easy, everyday, covered in hair kind of sweater. So that's my calm down sweater, finished in January 2024. Can't actually remember whether I finished this one before or after the calm down sweater, but whatever. So this is my Wishful sweater, again a January project, and this was knit in yarn that I bought in Copenhagen the year before on a little yarny trip. Kit Couture Blow, I think the yarn is called, a kind of blown alpaca cotton, that sort of yarn, and a heavy Aran weight. I think this was knit on a 6mm, so light, chunky, heavy Aran, whatever you want to call it, that kind of ballpark. And I love wearing it. It's so light and airy, but still cozy. My one thing with this sample is that because it grew more than expected, I mean, rookie error, I should have known that it would grow more than the swatch did. So the neck kind of is a little bit too wide in my version. Like these shoulder seams sit a little bit wider than ideal. So my solution for that, for the actual pattern, was to take some stitches out of the centre of the neck here, because the whole lot just could do with coming in a bit. So when I wrote the pattern up, I kind of just pinched down the centre front and centre back. So all of the shoulder shaping is exactly the same, because I really like this detail. I think that turned out quite effective. But instead of sitting there, it just kind of sits more like there where it's supposed to. So I do like this sweater, do enjoy wearing it. I think the kind of painterly effect of this yarn is really pretty, but if I was rating things, which I hadn't planned on doing in this video, but I'll give my honest feedback on myself. Yeah, the neck shaping, just not quite, this bit's just not quite right. I don't like that, but that won't happen in the actual pattern because I fixed it. It just means that the overall fit is not quite as polished as I would like on this one. So it's fine for me to wear, but it's not quite what I would have wanted. Certainly not bad enough for me to go back and redo the whole thing now, just change it for the new versions. Sometimes I think one sample is plenty for a pattern. There's no need to just keep going making others, but on certain occasions, well, on quite a few occasions actually, looking at the pile of knits I have next to me today, I do think it's worthwhile having different versions, just to, you know, show different vibes, different colours, different fit, whatever. So because I wasn't 100% about the neck shaping on that, or just a general fit, I thought it all needed a bit, for want of a better word, hopefully you know what I mean. And I wanted to offer a different sleeve option and also show it in a more accessible yarn, just because that Kit Couture yarn I think was only available in Scandinavia. I've had some difficulty finding out exactly what the deal was with it, but I didn't want it to only be a yarn that you can buy in that shop in Copenhagen. So then I had a sample knit made by my friend Lauren in Drops Air. So she knit this one for me. She did what I always request for sample knits, which is to make something kind of 95% finished, just leave the edges so that I can try it on, block it, and then cast it off myself. It's easier than redoing it if it's not quite the right fit. So as you can see here, if I put it on straight, that would be better. The shoulders are just a much better fit on this version. This detail is sitting more like where it should rather than down here where it was on the original, and the neck is just lying a little bit nicer, and there is no, well, there is when I tilt my head like an owl like that, but if I stand normally, there's no gaping at the back. So all fixed, and this is the version in the pattern, which of course still includes the balloon sleeve and the tapered sleeve. So yeah, this was sample knit for me, so not technically something I made this year, but an addition to my wardrobe. In Drops Air, cannot remember the colour, but you know, there's plenty of colours of it, and it's a really nice, accessible, affordable yarn. I feel like the blown yarns automatically feel more luxurious and expensive, even if they're not, so would definitely recommend this yarn. And this is the Wishful sweater version 2. Next up is another knit that was started in 2023, finished in 2024. Sat on the needles for an embarrassing amount of time, should have just got on with it, and it actually turned out to be one of my most worn items, so silly me for not just cracking on with that sooner. But this is my no, it's not my Wishful sweater. Engage the brain. This is my movement sweater, the 3rd version, which was a joint project between my mum and I. I think she knit part of the yoke and then part of the body, and then I did like the start bit, the rest of the body, and then the sleeves. So it got passed back and forth. But this gauge is very forgiving, so it's fine. And it's almost entirely made from scraps. I think I did buy a couple of balls of white mohair just to kind of finish it off, because I think it needed it, basically. But for the most part, it was scrap mohair that we had been accumulating for quite a number of years, so had lots of different colours. And my movement sweater originally used Aran weight yarn, and then for this version, we used 2 strands of mohair held together throughout. For the most part, it is one colour plus 1 strand of white or cream, or various whites and creams. I wasn't picky about it. And then with the odd stripe that is 2 strands of colour held together that kind of breaks it up a little bit. And I love this sweater so much. It's been really useful for trips as well, because it's obviously lightweight and packs down to nothing in a hand luggage suitcase, but feels like a statement piece and keeps you warm. So I took it to Barcelona this year, I took it to Lisbon, and it was just like the perfect kind of thing for those sort of cities, really. And what I've learned about scrap knitting with this project, I think this is the first properly like scrappy thing that I've made, is that I love it. It's fun to mix all the colours together and everything and see how things come out, use unusual combinations. Like I think there was one round where I was using like green and purple together and thinking ordinarily I would find this combination vile, but in this context it just works. But what I did find with doing the smaller stripes, like I think the maximum I ever did was 4 rounds of the same, apart from the edges, which are just 2 strands of white or pale pink and white, whatever. Apart from the edges and those odd sections, I changed colour every round or 2, or sometimes even less than a round. And I realised that what I found a little bit frustrating about it was that I never felt like I particularly could get into a flow, because it was always like stopping and changing. It was like, right, I can do 2 rounds, and then I need to think again. And I know some people with these like random scrappy knits do truly embrace that and literally just reach your hand in a bag and whatever colour comes out is the next colour that you use. But I thought that could be beautiful or disastrous, so I didn't want to take that risk. So I was kind of thinking about it, and I felt that did slow me down a little bit. Sometimes I was like, oh, I just want to be able to just knit, not have to keep stopping and thinking. But the end result is worth it, and obviously it used up yarn that has just been lingering around for ages. So I think maybe if you were trying to use like 8 different colours and have it in some sort of regular sequence, then that would be different, like way of using scraps, because then you wouldn't need to think about it. You just keep changing on repeat. But if you're trying to do scraps with, I don't even know how many colours are in this, at least 20, then obviously bear in mind you'll be either trusting randomness that it will work out perfectly and just hoping for the best and not thinking about it, or you'll be constantly thinking, what now? Will I go with that? No, I don't know, but maybe if I do this next, maybe it will look weird at first, but when I add that one in and blah, blah, blah. It was a lot of thinking, that more than I expected, but worth it. So I'm now wearing my calm down tee, which I'll talk about that in a second, after my Nettie scarf, which was a project in, I think, February, March, early in spring anyway. I can't really remember the exact details, but it doesn't matter. So the original version of the Nettie scarf was this big version that I used. Can't remember, I'll have to put it on the screen, the name of the brand, but a hand-dyed, subtle, semi-solid sock yarn. It's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? And this garter stitch based like mesh stitch pattern. I keep wanting to wobble around because it's so nice and drapey. Just feels really lovely. So when stretched out, it looks just like a regular triangular, elongated triangular shawl, but it actually has short rows in the middle to give it a subtle like boomerang shape. I don't know if that'll show it any better. Maybe not. Maybe that way. Anyway, it has a slight curve to it, and then this central spine down here. I really like the look of like outlines or clean edges. That kind of thing is sort of a regular feature in my designs in one way or another. I just really liked having it around the edges and then echoed in the centre. So a Nettie scarf can obviously be worn. I quite like wearing it just like this. It has kind of the drape that you get with a garter stitch based stitch pattern, because obviously there's no curl to the fabric. But then with extra drape because it has the double yarn overhauls in it. So I feel like it just hangs really nicely and is another good travel one, actually. This one's been on a couple of trips too. So yeah, that was next on my needles, was the big Nettie scarf, which isn't that big, but the bigger version, followed by 2 tiny versions. So I used some scrap yarn for this, left over from my Tonight top. This was West Yorkshire Spinners. West Yorkshire Spinners Exquisite, that's where I was heading with that. 4-ply in the black shade. That I think kind of just emphasises the fishnet-esque texture. Yeah, she's cute. Obviously, I'd already calculated the yardages at this point and established that you could make one big scarf plus one small scarf from like a standard skein of sock yarn. But I just wanted to check how it would work in a 2-tone version to see whether 2 minis would work together. So these were some leftovers that I had from a pair of socks the year before last or something. It's Susan Crawford vintage bloom sock, I think. Honestly, can't remember off the top of my head. I have a lot of yarn information floating around in here. But yeah, it did work really well, the 2-tone. I think that's super cute. Apologies for the number of times I've said the word cute already. Shall try to stop that going forward. But yeah, I wore this one to... must have made them sooner than I thought, actually, because I wore them to Unravel Festival, and that was in February. So I really do have the dates muddled up in my head. But yeah, that's the little teeny version of the Nettie scarf that I really enjoy knitting. I knit both of these small versions in a day. Well, a day each, not 2 in a day. That would be slightly ambitious. And now I have loads of minis in my yarn stash, actually. So maybe another version is due. What colours should I do? 2 brights again? Different brights? Don't know. Really enjoyed doing those. So whilst I'm wearing it, another spring project that I cast on in mid-April en route to Lisbon. I love casting on a new project on a flight. It all feels like it's nice and new and fresh. This is my Calm Down Tee, the next one in the series. I was on a roll. Knitting DK weight yarn, which uses the same kind of saddle shoulder detail as the sweater and the cardigan that I've already mentioned, but the fit is just completely different and the gauge is slightly different too. So it has a much more tailored fit here, like still the saddle shoulder, but instead of sitting further down here, which gives quite a relaxed look. More of a drop shoulder, but not fully drop down here. That's how I did the sweater and the cardigan. But for the t-shirt, I wanted it to feel a bit more tailored and polished, as much as a white t-shirt can do, and therefore kept the saddle piece, the saddle, whatever you want to call it, the like epaulette thing here, you know what I mean? Kept that a lot shorter so that this shoulder seam would sit kind of more on the bone here, which is, I really like that for a more tailored fit. And then used a lot more short rows in the sleeve to make sure that it properly hugs over the top of the arm there, rather than a more relaxed fitting sleeve, which I'll show in my Feels Right tee later, which has the sleeves not quite as tailored down here and therefore has a more sporty feel. So I find little things like that, like it can be the same construction, but the ratio of short rows can change the overall, like how formal or how fitted something feels, even if it's technically the same technique. Just kind of making little tweaks can make a big difference. This one I used Rosarios Belmonte, I want to say off the top of my head. I'll correct myself on screen if I'm wrong, but it was I think a 60-40 or a 50-50 cotton merino blend, which is my favourite kind of blend for a summer project. Yes, you might not wear it on the absolute hottest of scorching days, but in the UK, perfect. Wore this absolutely loads. Would definitely recommend this yarn. And a DK weight t-shirt, it's up pretty quick. Whilst we're on the topic of t-shirts, this Feels Right tee was a project that my mum did most of the sample knitting for this one. I think I did the edgings and the collar of the sleeves and things like that. And it's actually a pattern from a few years ago, which was a bit of a theme this year, kind of revisiting older designs that I felt still had scope in them and just kind of reimagining them in a way. So this one originally had hand-dyed panel across the front, so scrapped that and just went for a plain version. And again, it's been super handy, had lots of wear all summer, all spring and summer, to be honest. And like I was saying before, it's just the kind of little details that make a difference. Like on this one, the sleeves don't have quite so many short rows. They still have decreases here, so it doesn't stick out, because I really don't like that. They're not quite as deep, don't have quite as many short rows. That means it has a slightly more casual, ever so slightly sporty fit. Like, I mean, I don't look like I'm going to the gym, clearly, but just slightly less tailored than the Calm Down tee, which also has a slightly lower neck. So a few people asked me when I was making them, like, what's the difference between these two? Like, are they not just both a t-shirt? Yes, they are, but this one's 4-ply or fingering weight. That one is DK, and those little details, I think they're subtle, but they do make a difference depending what kind of vibe you're going for. So both this version and this yellow version that I'll pop on in a second are knit in Yarn Art Baby Cotton, which is a very, very budget-friendly yarn. I think it's between £1.50 and £2 a ball, depending where you buy it from. And I'd absolutely love it. Like, I'm not a yarn snob, never will be. I've spoken about this many times that I know acrylic yarns or cheaper yarns are not necessarily the best environmentally, ethically. I know there are issues, but also it's not realistic for everybody to knit with super expensive stuff all the time, and I would not want anyone to ever feel like they had to. So I'm a big fan of making things look nice and neat and expensive through neat knitting and neat techniques rather than expensive yarn. I will die on that hill and have mentioned it many times, but anyway, Yarn Art Baby Cotton. Me and my friends absolutely love this yarn now. It's like our go-to for summer items. Obviously not for everything, but it does work really well, and it's a cotton acrylic 50-50 blend that comes in a bajillion different colours. So these are my two t-shirts. Bright yellow felt like a bit of a rogue colour for me. I normally only wear it with a tan, which is usually fake in my case because I do not tan naturally, and I do not have any tan on at the moment, so it's probably not doing my complexion any favours, but sometimes it's nice to just kind of push the boat out, break the rules, isn't it? Break your own rules, self-imposed, that is. And it is a very fun, sunny, happy colour. Occasionally, I think it can work to just chop off the sleeves to make a short sleeve version of a sweater and leave the rest of the pattern unaffected. But in most cases, I think other things need to change as well. So when I had the idea of making a t-shirt version of my movement sweater, I knew that it needed to go back to starting from scratch, using the same concept and same detail of this eyelet detail running down the raglans, but I didn't even consider just making a short sleeve version of the original because too many things needed to change. So the movement tee, knit that in March, April, can't remember. So I used a different gauge, used DK weight yarn, Sandnes Yarn Duo in this case, a 50-50 cotton wool blend. I think it's 50-50, it might be 60-40, don't quote me on that. A blend anyway. I used DK weight yarn and the same eyelet detail, but whereas on the sweater the raglan keeps going out to be quite wide here because I wanted it to have a decent amount of positive ease. On the t-shirt the raglan goes out at the regular kind of increase rate for a certain amount of time, and then the increase rate changes because humans don't go out and down. They kind of, have more of a curve to them. So I wanted to follow that with pattern. So the raglans aren't super, tight. They're not like up here in your armpit because I still wanted there to be a bit of room, but it's not like super oversized either. And I think that was the nicest way of having this flow down the side of the body there. So I really love how stripes interact with this detail as well, that you get the kind of glitchy business here, and it means that you don't have to care about doing any sort of jogless joints because you make a deliberate jog, so you can just hide it in there. And again, it has been worn lots, and a classic navy and white just felt like an easy option that you just know it's going to look good, don't you? If it ain't broke. So that is my movement tee. I'm not counting these projects. I've not even totted them up there. Maybe I should. This is the first of what went on to become 2 samples of this pattern. Whilst we're on the topic, I've just popped this version on, which matches the wallpaper rather well. Am I decorating my house to match me, or am I decorating myself to match the house? Who knows? But we're kind of developing a colour palette, you could say. So this version uses the same yarn as the main yarn because I had plenty of it left over. Well, I say plenty. Did work out just enough in the end, but clever me thought, oh, I used 4 balls of navy for the original one. I have 4 balls of cream. Easy, can make a second. Whilst forgetting that on the original version, because I did like triple stripes, the contrast colour made up a significant portion of the overall top. Whereas my plan for this one was to do single stripes, so the contrast colour didn't take up as much of the overall item, and I would need more of the main colour. Why that didn't occur to me before casting on, I do not know. But it didn't, so well done me there. Just about made it in the end, had to play yarn chicken, but it was fine. So for this version, used exactly the same pattern, however, instead of just doing the stripes in stocking stitch, like all throughout, I just did a purl round. On the rounds where I changed colour, I purled. That was it. And I think it turned out really effective, especially with the bit of fluff here. So for the contrast stripes, I used 5 spades cumulus held double, which I think made for a really nice little bit of texture there. And on this original navy and white version, the inside of the collar and cuffs is in the white, so it has just that little bit of kind of edging peeks through there. But I didn't do that on this one, partly because I didn't want the fluff there, and partly because I just thought there was enough going on, so I omitted it there. And hopefully it has a slightly different feel. Not too different, but this was a nice one to take away with me to Belgium, because I've learnt the lesson that trying to take anything too complicated on a trip is not wise. It's not too bad, like taking a new project if I'm going to have a decent amount of time by myself or just chilling around the pool or something like that. But if I'm going to be with people, then anything that requires brain power is not wise, because it'll just slow me down. I just won't be able to actually make any decent amount of progress. So whilst I didn't really need a second sample of this one because it's not that different to the original, I just wanted a simple, easy project that I could take with me on the Knitty Girls trip to Belgium earlier this year. And I think I made a decent amount of progress. I think I got to like here in the 3-day trip, and that was without any kind of like knitting travelling time that I would normally have on a plane, because I drove all the way there, so there was no knitting in the car for me. But I still managed to get quite a bit done, so I'm glad I treated myself to just a project that didn't particularly have an objective and was just to be able to knit for knitting's sake rather than to have to do a new design. I think that was worthwhile doing on a trip. Well, I've never worn this top with these trousers that are like my go-to trousers for pairing with most knits, hence why I'm wearing them today. Never actually paired these two together, but I think I kind of quite like the grey and camel as a unusual combination. Quite liking that. Haven't worn this in a while because obviously it's one of my more summery knits. Hence the crease down the front. It's been folded for a little while, but I do really like it. So this one was knit mostly by my mum. I did all the calculations, of course, and then some of the fussy bit around the top and the edgings, double knit edgings. My mum cranked through a load of stocking stitch for me, which I'm very grateful for, that I kind of handed that bit over to her whilst I was working on other things. So yeah, this is my Calm Night cami. I realised it got a bit confusing with the whole naming situation that I had going on here, but I wanted to do something else in my Calm Down series, like to complete the series. Once I had a cardigan, a sweater and the t-shirt, I was like, the last one remaining is like a little camisole. And I also wanted to use the double knit edging detail from my Tonight top. So it's kind of a hybrid, but then also the neck and everything is completely from scratch anyway. And this one is for the people who said that they liked the Tonight top, but said, what possible use is there for a high neck sleeveless top? Here you go. I think there's plenty of use for a sleeveless turtleneck. It's extremely wearable in UK climate, but I understand that's not going to be the case for everyone. So this used the same curved double knitting detail. Curved double knitting is possibly my favourite thing ever. Just love how that flows around there. So this used that same detail, but in a more like summer top. This one is again in Yarn Art Baby Cotton. Old Faithful, 50/50 cotton acrylic. Really nice and drapey, can go in the washing machine, which is obviously handy for summer knits that get a bit of sun cream and whatnot on them. This one came to Lisbon with me. Came on a scooter ride to, what's it called, the custard tart place. Is that how you pronounce it? Don't hate me. I always remember where I wore things. Maybe that should be a series in its own, like knitty travel moments or something like that. I don't know. But anyway, summer. Calm Night cami. Tonight top Calm Down series kind of hybrid situation, and I think I have completed that series now. Next project that I'm just going to hold rather than try to do some acrobatic manoeuvre that I am not flexible enough for. Next is the Finest Fit socks that I basically knit because I had a real itch to knit socks in June, I think it was. This was the Knit City Toronto exclusive colourway from Botanical Yarns that she very kindly gave me at the show in Toronto. And I really wanted to use it, but knew that obviously the colour would kind of be the star of the show, so I didn't want anything going on pattern-wise. And also realised that whilst I've used the same sock technique on a few patterns now, my favourite way of making a well-fitting heel, I'd never actually just done a plain pair of socks with that technique. So it was like, perfect. I have yarn that needs to be a plain sock. I have a pattern that needs a plain version. Let's combine the two. And I got really carried away and knit a whole sock in a day. It was like, oh my god, I'm loving it. And the stripes made it go so much quicker. So here we are. Finest Fit socks. They're a little bit scrumpled here. Just trying to flatten those out. They've been in the sock drawer. Been in plenty of use. This is the key part anyway. The extra shaping here. That means they don't strain over your heel like most short row socks do. Because I really don't like that look. So just simple vanilla socks with a little twist that makes them fit well and work extremely well for straps. I am kind of fancying knitting another pair. It's been about 6 months since I last knit a sock, and maybe it's time for another one. But yeah, they're just a really nice palette cleansing simple project. Maybe I should always have a sock on the go as like my background project that just comes in my bag when I need something simple. Maybe that would be a good plan. Just throwing this one on over the camisole, which I would never normally wear together, but I think it's a little bit too low to wear on its own for YouTube. So we're not that kind of channel. This yarn did not want to be a project. Honestly, it did my head in, to be honest. I think this was either the third or fourth, I think third attempt to make something using this combination. My first two attempts just didn't go well. I should have curled it quits after the first one instead of trying the same pattern again. But anyway, we got there in the end. So this is my yarn Axis by lilykate, held together with Fibre Spates Cumulus, which makes a beautiful fabric. I had been trying to use it in brioche, but it just wasn't working. It was for various reasons. But it works really nicely just in stocking stitch and garter stitch, hence why I made the garter details kind of the main feature of this pattern. Oh, that was a loud crack. Creaking and cracking. It's not the floor, it's my knuckles. I knit this one in, must have been about May, because I know I wore it in Belgium on my Nettie trip in June. I find this system works quite well for me sometimes. If I'm being organised and trying to be on top of things and make an autumn winter kind of pattern, as in a reasonably warm cardigan, but make it earlier in the year so that the pattern actually comes out in a reasonable time, I think a good combination is to then use a fairly summery colour, especially if you don't live somewhere really warm. Like, this was handy to have at the beach in Belgium, or at the beach in the UK as well, actually, in summer. And the fact that it was in a brighter, fresher colour made it feel like I wasn't just wearing my winter clothes in the middle of summer. So I quite like doing that. Using bright, summery colours for winter items, just so that they can be worn all year round. So pat on the back to me for that. This is my Close to Me cardigan pattern, now available. Used 6mm needles, which I find they're like probably the Goldilocks size for feeling like you're making quick progress. It kind of flies off the needles, but doesn't feel too chunky and too heavy. Any chunkier and you start getting into like chunkiness territory, if you know what I mean. But yeah, it does knit up nice and quickly. So this is my first of 2 of these that I knit this year. Didn't realise how many duplicates I'd made. Maybe next year I should try and just knit one of these. This next one has had a few mentions on this channel, so I'll keep it brief. This is my Take Turns tank, another project that my mum knit most of, I think. So she was working on these like sample knits of older patterns whilst I was working on new ones. It's good than the system we've got there. The original version had raised stripes on the back and then was plain all over. So this time switched it up and did stripes all over, but without the raised detail on the back. But it does still have this little mitered corner there that fits really nicely and just adds a little bit of something. It means it has a subtle racer back shape, but can still be worn with a regular bra. I sometimes use one of those clasps that holds your bra straps together at the back, and that works really well to make sure that it's definitely not seen, but these are plenty wide enough to cover most bra straps anyway. And the main thing that I'm proud of with this one is that whilst it was just use the same numbers and everything from the original pattern, I was very, very careful with the stripe placement to make sure that this didn't happen, because I just really don't like it when you get the kind of tugging there, and that happens when the neck shaping isn't done as a proper curve, when it's just done as a diagonal and you put too much strain on the fabric. So made sure that didn't happen. And also it has slightly bigger section here that's just in red, because I find it looks much neater to omit a stripe rather than like forcing a stripe in where there's just about room for it when short rows are involved. I just let the short rows breathe, let the neck shaping breathe, and the stripes kind of slot in where there is a proper place for them. That's my weird logic of working these things out, but that's kind of how it is in my head. So yeah, I did a lot of spreadsheeting for that. If it can be spreadsheeted, I will spreadsheet it. Trust me, I love a good Google sheet. Did the same for all the different sizes, so it felt like a refreshed update on a pattern without having to actually recalculate all the numbers, which is a really nice system and works well for me, it seems. Continuing with the bright red and new versions of old patterns theme, this is a calm down cardigan that was again a joint project. My mum did the body and I did the sleeves and the double neck button band on this one, using a yarn that we saw in Abercan. Hadn't seen it before. I was like, I wonder if that would work. Well, I wonder what that would knit up like. James Brett, or Shush, however you want to say it, SHHHH. I think it's mostly acrylic with a bit of wool in it, something like that. And I won't pretend that it feels like you're wearing a mohair and wool sweater, but it looks like it. And it's perfectly soft enough to wear. Like, I'm wearing that against my skin there. Really nice. I think it can be machine washed, actually. I never have. But it used 2 balls, and then each ball was £4. So really, for a nice cardigan for £8, you can't complain, can you? If it feels ever so slightly squeaky on the needles sometimes. Doesn't bother me. I typically wear a size 2 in my patterns, and in my original condom cardigan, the size 2 fit is slightly more generous than this. And usually I'd advise against kind of messing with gauge to change the finished size of something. Not advise against it, but advise doing so with caution and careful thought to the fibre properties, not just subbing one for another. In this case, I thought because the fabric is going to be lightweight and quite fine, it's okay if it comes out a little bit smaller and is knit at a slightly smaller gauge. If the yarn had quite a lot of structure and was another woolly yarn, then I probably wouldn't have recommended that. I'd have stuck with the original, more generous fit. But on this occasion, I thought it was fine for it to come out kind of smaller. So I'd say that this is the equivalent of like a size 1.5 in my patterns. So it's still clearly not tight fitting, but it just sits ever so slightly snugger at this point, which means slightly seam. I brought that. Probably wouldn't wear it like this, but it's not exactly not being an exhibitionist right now. I'm sure it'll be fine. Yeah, it just means that this like notch section actually comes apart a little bit more, and it kind of, you can wear it depending how you sort of tuck it. You kind of have it more like that, like it's slightly more fitted. My friend Claudia also borrowed it while we were in Barcelona, and she's like teeny tiny. She's a size 1 definitely in my patterns, and she had it more like this, and it looked really nice on her too. It's coming nice and handy as this one, this £8 cardigan. This next project I couldn't share at all at the time because it was a secret. This was my design for the Tune Fibre Advent Calendar collaboration that I worked on earlier this year, but came out in December, obviously. When they approached me about this collab, they said they'd like to work with both me and another designer this year to do 2 totally different kind of palettes for an advent calendar. So hers is very soft and quite pastel-y, with kind of variegated colours, and all very soft and subtle. And then mine was supposed to be like the bold one, which is fine by me. I do like a bit of high contrast. But it was really quite a challenge, actually, to come up with something that used 12 colours. Like, nailing the actual palette itself was kind of tricky. But then designing something that used 12 colours in one item, which is a little bit out of my comfort zone. As you can see, everything so far has been either solid, striped, or there's the one scrappy item, but that's different when it's like a million different scraps. Nothing particularly using lots of colours deliberately in one pattern. So it did really kind of push me design-wise. But this is what I came up with. I knew I wanted to make some kind of shawl neckwear item of some description. That seemed like the best way to use the yarn quantity, 12 mini skeins. But I thought, right, what different way, rather than just like a traditional triangular shawl, what are the different ways that I can split a shawl into 12 sections? And this is what I landed on. So as you can see, it's kind of worked 6 sections per side. So you basically start at the tip of one end of it. So you start at one end, keep increasing until you get to the full width here, then decrease down so that you've made half a shawl, and then you repeat the process for the other side, making a second triangle, attaching it to the first one as you go along. And then that enabled me to split it into 6 sections per side, 12 in total, and change one shade at a time so that they had some overlap, but it wasn't like a faded blend or anything like that. It just kind of meant that each colour got to go with 2 different colours, and that was it. And I think that would kind of work. Rather than being like 12 distinct blocks, there was some element of continuity to it, and then the final shade going past again. And then the colour that you use at the start, colour A, which was the green in this case, you then use again at the end, and it like completes the round robin and ties it all together. So that was the logic behind it. It took quite a while of me thinking about which colours to use and where, how to place them all in a way that looked sort of random but also sort of balanced. Again, spreadsheets. I worked it all out on Google Sheets and plotted it all out on there before actually committing to it. This is what I ended up with. The chapter shawl, I'm calling it, because it was supposed to be inspired by my like cozy Christmas bookshelf, so I thought we needed a bookish name. So this pattern is currently only available to the people who bought the Chink Advent Calendar, but in February, I'm not sure the exact date that I will end up releasing the pattern, but sometime soon anyway, I'll be releasing it as a standalone pattern. And my first project for 2025, that's going to be on my needles this evening hopefully, is actually a cushion version of this, that instead of just being 2 triangles together to make one big triangular shawl, it's going to be 4 triangles, so imagine this again, to make a square cushion. Obviously smaller, but the concept is there. And whilst for the original I used 12 colours obviously, and each colour was only ever used for 2 blocks. In my cushion I'm going to use just one colour as like the background and then just change, so I'm just going to I think use just cream as the background and then just change this so it has a little bit more continuity through it, and then that can show how this stitch pattern, be it used on a cushion or a shawl, looks without constantly changing colour. So obviously this does work for an advent, this batch of colours, or a more subtle collection, whatever advents you may have, or just minis games, but will also work in, it would work in anything from 2 to 12 colours basically. So there was a lot of thought went into it, but hopefully it paid off. Chapter shawl was the next project, which I'm glad I can finally share, because I wanted to talk about this all as I was going along in June, July, whatever it was, but I couldn't. Had to keep it secret. I can now. As for what I'm wearing, this is another one that my mum knit the most of and is another new version of an older pattern, continuing with that theme. Pattern being the Brightest tee, which made sense when it was in bright pink originally and now is the dullest Brightest tee. That's its official title, because it is in a dark grey. But I changed the sleeves, so I did recalculate those and then I knit the sleeves so that the original had like teeny tiny cap sleeves, and then this has slightly more substantial, like, still I'd probably call it a cap sleeve rather than a proper sleeve, but it's more, covers more of your shoulder and properly comes down onto the arm, whereas the other was like on your shoulder more. Has the decreases down there and in this kind of charcoaly shade, which is another one that I think works summer or winter. So in this case it's like, oh, it's a summer pattern but do it in a more wintry colour, and therefore it can be worn, can be sort of styled in a wintry Christmassy way, or look nice for a grey and white summery outfit. I think that's a general theme that I quite like actually, is doing summer patterns in wintry colours and vice versa. Just kind of helps with versatility, so that's something I would probably be doing more of over the next year. This next project fits that bill perfectly actually, of wintry pattern, summery colour. My On the Dot sweater, that this one was a 100% me project, and well, it feels like it was a 300% me project to be honest, because I near enough knit the whole thing 3 times. It required so much frogging because the neck wasn't right, and then the stitch pattern wasn't quite lining up right, and then the gauge wasn't how I expected it to be, just various different things that it tested my patience, but we got there in the end and I'm really happy with it. So On the Dot sweater, another one that was kind of designed a bit backwards. I sort of started with the maths and then worked out a collar pattern, stitch pattern that would sort of slot in with my maths. A bit of a weird way of doing things, but it works for me. And for this one I used onion knit mohair and wool that I bought at Unravel Festival, I nearly said earlier this year, but last year, haven't quite adjusted yet, in February 2024. And it's a 50-50 blend of mohair and wool, as you'd expect, that knits up kind of like if you added a strand of mohair to a wool yarn, but you don't have to bother with the hassle of holding strands together. So I did really like this yarn and will potentially be using it again. Not sure if I'm going to a Ravel Festival this year, probably. But I'll see what yarns kind of take my fancy there. I do like buying yarn in person. This was one that I would never have probably come across online, but now that I've seen it at a yarn show in person, it's become one of my favourites. Definitely my warmest, cosiest sweater of the bunch. This is my 1703 sweater, which the lovely Alison came up with the name for this one actually when I was struggling to think of a title that suited it, and this is the first project that I finished in this house after I'd moved in, and the house was built in 1703, and she was like, well, if Levi's can have 501s, Lily can have 1703, so that's how it got its name. I think it suits it. I actually started this one last year, 2023, and it then lived in a cupboard for a while because various things kept going wrong with it. I didn't learn from previous mistakes and made the armholes too shallow, which I cannot stand. But I'd only realised that once I did the sleeves and had to rip back loads, by which point it was just too late. So late in the season, that is. So I just abandoned it, picked it up again this year in August or thereabouts, and finished it ready for this year. I used Axis, my yarn held double, so it is really quite chunky and heavy. But some of the test knitters used all different sorts of yarns. Like I think one person even used just 2 strands of mohair, which obviously makes for a much lighter and finer fabric than this, and it suited her climate better, and it just looked so lovely in that lighter weight yarn. So I may be tempted to add one of those. Maybe that'll be this sweater's update. In 2 years to come, maybe it'll have a new version knit in a different yarn like that. But for now, I really like the chunky, cozy, easy version that probably would have been knit in about 10 days if I just got on with it, but actually took me 10 months. Now for my most recent finished object, which is not actually blocked yet, because I wanted to include it in this video, but I don't think this fabric is going to grow too much, so fingers crossed it doesn't grow overly, because I actually quite like the fit as it is. And the fabric's really neat anyway. I put that down to the yarn. I actually started this in September or thereabouts, but I literally cast it off on New Year's Eve, just gone. So been on the needles a while, most of the time just sat there on the back burner, not really making much progress. This is my to be released close to me sweater. During the cardigan test knit, I was chatting with some of the test knitters, obviously, and said about, might be missing a trick to not do a sweater version of this pattern. But we kind of all agreed that the cardigan works at a more chunky gauge because the V-neck is quite low, and so it's not too much fabric up here, and it's okay with it having a bit more drape because it's, I don't know, it just suits it as a cardigan. Sometimes it's difficult to actually give technical reasons for these things. It's just, it suits it or it doesn't. But we agreed that for a sweater, it would probably be better in DK weight. So I'm using Lamana yarns, finally it can be past tense this one. Lamana yarns Homo tweed held together with their Premier, which is their like silk mohair, which made a really lovely fabric. It does look a little bit lumpy because it's not blocked, but as unblocked fabrics go, I'd say this is looking pretty good. So this has the same shoulder detail as the cardigan, obviously at a finer gauge, so there are far more ridges in there with the short rows, the short rows here and here and here, and it's all built in to give you the nice shoulder slope, but also create a detail while you're at it. And then the detail is also echoed on the neck, which is 100% my favourite part of this. Added a ribbed neck because what did I try it with originally? I tried it as a folded stocking stitch one and it looked awful. So yeah, just went for rib on that. And the sleeves used the same detail there again, but for the hem, whereas whilst the cardigan does have the garter like short row detail at the hem, I didn't think it would suit this as like a sweatshirt. I wanted it to just be super casual and kind of bag over a tiny bit. You know, like when it comes in at the hem ever so slightly, but not like cinching. And I don't think garter stitch would have the desired effect. So just has a tiny bit of rib at the bottom there. Usually I say with blocking to aim for a fit that just looks awkward pre-blocking and then it'll grow loads. And with the cardigan that I'm about to show next, that was definitely the case. It grew quite a lot, like really looked too small before blocking and now it's definitely not. But with this one, I think because the fabric itself is reasonably dense gauge, I don't think it's going to grow too much. So I actually did make it nearer to the intended fit pre-blocking. But if I'm wrong on that and it grows more than I want, the body, that's fine. I'm okay with that if it grows a bit more. The sleeves, I will just have to redo this a little bit, but I'll get over that. Thrown two items on at once here, partly for speed because we are losing the light, and partly for decency because this cardigan is covered in fluff now. It's stuck to my eyelashes. The cardigan I was just referencing that looked way too small before blocking and is now, these sleeves are definitely not too short. It's definitely not too small. Trusted the process on that one, that this fabric would grow a lot, and it did. So this is just another version of my close to me cardigan, knit by me. I made a couple of little tweaks to the original pattern, so I thought maybe I should make another one following the updated version myself, although come to think of it, the changes were so minor that I probably did not need to knit the second version really. Probably should have spent my knitting time doing something else, but you live and learn. It's currently missing buttons because I do have some, but I'm not convinced they're perfect. So I'm going to do a bit of button internet trawling tonight, or yeah, probably will have to do it online. I don't think I'm going anywhere that has a decent button selection anytime soon. But the original one lived without buttons for 3 months and I wore it quite a bit, so maybe it's just its rite of passage. Yeah, close to me cardigan, this time in a grey, the dark grey of my yarn axis, held together with a sort of, I'm trying to think how best to describe it. I'll not bother trying to describe it, I realised I had some there. This is the shade of Cumulus that it's held together with, so as is my favourite way of doing these mould items or double-stranded items, I like to pick 2 shades that are just a bad match, like not enough to be a marl, or not an obvious marl at least, but not perfectly matched either, just slightly off, and that worked really well with dark charcoaly grey. So that was another recently finished object that I don't think I've actually taken proper photos of yet. I tried and then had various technical issues. Canon app did me dirty and they look awful, so it's yet to grace the Instagrams, but I shall do that shortly. Underneath, just to clarify, I would not wear these items together. I'm just trying to rattle through them now because the light is quickly disappearing. This item was sample knit for me by Kiliana. After she made a version of the Wishful sweater, my pattern from earlier last year, she made a version in bamboo, and I loved it. Hers was bright blue. Fluff stuck to my face. Hers was bright blue, and she sized down in it, and it just looked so different to the original, but so effective, like so slinky, and makes it into this kind of evening top, when the original ones, as you saw at the beginning of this video, are more like cozy vibes. So I was like, oh my god, I need one of those. Please will you sample it for me? A little bit. Please will you sample knit one for me? So she did. This used Rosarios. I forget the name every time. I'll have to put it on the screen, but it's their like bamboo yarn. 2 strands held together, but the key thing here was that it was sized down. So as I said, I'm normally a size 2 in my patterns, that fits my measurements, but this is a size 1 and on a smaller needle, so nothing else has changed about it. Oh, actually, there's no decreases in the sleeves either, they're just straight. So they're not the tapered ones, but they're not flared either. And it gives the illusion of a flared sleeve, but actually there's no increases there. Same swatch of different vibes. We continue with that theme. Another 2 at a time, because time is of the essence now. After I finished my checker plate sweater, I thought, this stitch pattern would work really well in a hat. And I had plenty of this pink yarn. So here we are. We have the hat version. The checker plate hat pattern has been available for a little while. The sweater is almost ready now. It just all comes together nicely. The crown shaping there. Did I tip my head down enough? Don't know if you can see, hopefully. But yeah, I used my Axis yarn in the shade Neutrino, which, in case you couldn't tell, is one of my favourite shades. And because, yes, I had plenty of this pink yarn, and I knew we were going to Barcelona, and there had kind of been a bit of a discussion of having a matchy group knit, and the Ribblesdale vest was decided on. I was like, well, I need a new version then, because my original 2 are beige and green, and they were just wasn't feeling that. I'm kind of, there's nothing wrong with those, but they didn't feel too exciting, and I wanted something more fun and bright to wear to the yarn festival in a warm, sunny country. So put this one up in about a week or so, and finished the knitting on the plane on the way there, finished weaving the ends and sewing the buttonhole closed the night before, and then wove the final end on the morning of the show. So nothing like cutting it fine. Story of my life, but it's fine. I got to wear it. Didn't need blocking. I gave it a quick steam and it was fine. Sewed the button band shut on this one. The originals do have functioning button bands, and I did knit this as if it was, I knitted flat and then picked up and sewed it. Picked up and worked the button band in the regular manner, but didn't bother making buttonholes because I knew I was going to sew it, and just because I couldn't be bothered, to be honest. And I think it does look really nice, like, because it's sewn down properly and without the buttons, it kind of looks like it's supposed to be worn as a top, like a vest top rather than a waistcoat vest, which I think kind of makes sense of it. And I'm only going to wear it like that, closed, in the pink anyway. I'm probably not going to use it as a layering piece, just going to wear it on its own or under a jacket, not over a shirt. So it all worked out. another project that I probably didn't need to make. Was just being a bit silly, but self-indulgent every once in a while. I did actually knit one more version of this checker plate hat in bright blue. I used a DK weight yarn rather than the worsted weight used in my original. It's an end not woven in there, don't judge me for that. Because I'd hoped that it would work out, child-sized. Because you can't really mess around with the stitch counts or the stitch repeats or anything. It's all, worked out to come together nicely, and you can't just take a few stitches out. So the only way to change the size is to change the gauge. And it worked out quite successfully, but I do not have that in my possession right now to show you, because I gave it to Frank, my boyfriend's 6-year-old brother. So he has that. Maybe I'll pop a photo in here. He was very enthusiastic about taking photos. Which brings me to the last item, thankfully, because this light has gone, and if the viewfinder is anything to go by, I'm looking like death right now in this dodgy grey light. This is a poisoned apple top that was, again, mostly knit by my mum, of an older pattern. The original version had a sheer panel across here. It was in navy. And then we have this yarn. I can't remember where it's from, but it's another super budget friendly like acrylic yarn. And just used one yarn for the whole thing rather than swapping, having the sheer panel here. So it still has the nice structure of the puff sleeves and everything, but it's slightly less dressy because of the lack of sheer panel. So another update on an older pattern that, again, works all year round. There's a few running themes here. That brings me to the end of this long, rambly video. I don't know how long it's going to be. Good luck to me editing. At first I thought I hadn't knit that much this year. I thought, don't feel like I've been that productive. Maybe I shouldn't do one of those videos. But now I'm like, oh yeah, that's still quite a few stitches. Obviously not all of them by me. Some by my friends or my mum when they've been involved with sample knitting, but either way, lots of stitches by everyone. So thank you very much for watching. I might film a video on my design plans for 2025, which are not set in stone yet. I'm still kind of figuring plans out. So let me know if there's anything you'd like to see from me design-wise over the next year. Anything that you think I should do more of or less of. It's quite helpful actually to have it all out here and kind of assess and see how things have changed as the year's gone on. You're always growing and evolving and learning more about yourself and how you work, aren't you? But yeah, I think good to reassess, and now time to move on. Time to learn from things and start some new projects. So thank you for watching.